the question that you don't want to be asked by your child and not have an answer to is, why did you give up? For one thing, you want to be able to go back to the child and say, I tried, and here's what I did. I did everything I could. Well, I'll start by saying that, first of all, right now, all we have is a lay definition. You won't find parental alienation syndrome in the DSM. You won't find it in any psychology books. Right now, there's a working understanding, though, of what it is. We don't have a syndrome attached to it, but generally speaking, parental alienation is a term that we use to describe a pattern of conduct by a child's caregiver, a minor child's caregiver, designed to intentionally interfere in the relationship between that child and a parent. Now, I don't say other parents, because really parental alienation can come from any child, any caregiver of the child. It can come from a grandparent or a guardian. But usually we see it as one parent alienating the other. And usually we will see it can actually affect any parent. It's not just women doing it to men. Men can do it to women as well. But either way, it's absolutely harmful to the child. And that when we say parental alienation, we're talking about that pattern of conduct intentionally interrupting or attempting to interrupt the relationship between the parent and that child.
Thank you. David, how do we see that expressed? What's the sort of things that a pro se dad that doesn't have a family law lawyer would be looking at to say, hey, wait a minute, I think the parental alienation is happening here?
Well, there's a couple different ways, and I just want to expand on what Brian was saying, that the definition of parental alienation is that interference, but it also comes with degrees. Many couples, when they first break up, there's that early stage of just hurt feelings on both sides, and it's your mom's being difficult and your dad's being a jerk stuff, and that tends to fade after a while. And that's not really the parental alienation that we're looking at dealing with here.
No.
What we're looking at is the more long-term stuff that takes more like 6 months, a year, and it's the consistent denigration of the other side. It's trying to erase the other side from the child. And it's alienating them in such a way that they feel completely validated in eliminating the other party. And it can start with something as simple and what seems like not a big deal is literally starting to use someone's first name as opposed to being called dad. And it's that first step of, okay, now we're going to put space between the relationship of dad and human and try and make that that's John. So it's not your dad, it's John. And so mom might always refer to John that way, or grandma, or whoever's doing the alienating, as Brian pointed out, will be doing that to just sort of start pushing that person out of the child's consciousness. This completely illogical reasoning the child's engaging in that pushes the other party out.
Right. When I first talk to a parent about parental alienation, I like to direct them to Dr. Bill Bernay's article on the 5-factor model. And I usually tell them, go read this thing, make flashcards, learn the lingo. What do you say, Brian, on when it comes to educating the client or educating, a pro se dad?
Well, there's a lot there, but I think generally speaking, first of all, when you have a client or a father who is the victim of parental alienation, they may not know what to call it, but they understand what's happening. They see what's happening. They feel what's happening. And the first thing, in terms of how to advise the client, it really depends a lot on where they are in that process, how long it's been going on, how serious it is. Sometimes we see, as David was saying, we see little things like, okay, that's John. It's not dad, it's John. We see those sorts of things. When a parent is perpetuating this, sometimes they set limits for themselves, and sometimes it's just all out. I'm going to erase this person from the child's life. What I will say is that when you have a situation where you are really feeling those effects of alienation, where this has progressed to a point where now the relationship is disrupted, maybe the child won't talk to the parent, the child believes false things about the parent. When we've gotten to the point where the disruption is either complete or approaching complete, it's a hopeless place for a lot of fathers, a lot of parents in that situation. And what I tell them is, number one, don't stop. Because what you can do is, as a parent, you have to realize the things you can control and the things you can't control. And someday that child's going to be an adult again. Someday that child is going to look back and be like, did that really happen? Or they'll remember, they'll be able to think independently. They'll have their own ideas. They'll be able to look back and, if not sort things out, at least question the bad information that they were fed in this process and be receptive to new information. And I've spoken to a lot of parents who went through this season of alienation, and their kids got older, they entered into adulthood, they reached out to them, which a lot of times happens, and they're given that opportunity to mend the situation. And the question that you don't want to be asked by your child and not have an answer to is, why did you give up? For one thing, you want to be able to go back to the child and say, I tried, and here's what I did. I did everything I could. Second, with regard to perseverance, is I can't tell you how many times I've had a situation and they want to quit, and if they just keep pushing further, they can start making progress. They can get further along. They can start to turn things around. The other side they get exhausted too in the process. Believe it or not, they can get exhausted too. And there are plenty of times where it will come down to who has the greater will here, which is greater, parties' hate for you or your love for the child. And just keep pushing forward.